Hi, my little friends. So we're going to read, running out of time because we just got up to the good part. So this is what you can do for 10 minutes a day. So I'll just read 10 minutes at a time because that's what we normally do. But just listen because you won't have your books. Okay, we're on page 132. Jessie's been listening outside the door, the kids, and she's realizing that Mr. Neely might not be so great. Okay, Jessie didn't know what to think about Mr. Neely, but she knew Ma wouldn't want Jessie to die. Was Ma even more confused about the outside world Clifton had than she thought? Dimly, Jessie heard the door into the apartment open and close. A man's low voice rumbled, but Jessie couldn't make out the words. If she listened, would she understand why Mr. Neely wanted to kill her? Jessie crawled to the door to the main room and pressed her ear against the wood. Miles is panicking, she heard Mr. Neely say. Doesn't want blood on his hands. No, it's greed. He sees all the tourist money disappearing, a man's bear-like voice answered, but he agreed from the beginning the tourists were just a cover. We have to remind him our research is more important than anything else. Jessie couldn't hear the next response. It sounded like Mr. Neely again. Then a woman's high voice said, "Maybe we can have it both ways. We take care of the diphtheria deaths quietly, and bingo! Miles keeps his tourist money. We get our research." More talk Jessie couldn't hear. Then, "No more tourists," the bear voice said. "Someone's bound to get suspicious if we keep running thousands of people through there." Jessie remembered the guards back at Clifton talking about the village closing down. They had said that there wouldn't be any more tourists. But why would anyone want to have Clifton Village without tourists? What research were Mr. Neely and the others talking about? Why did they want anyone to die of diphtheria? Jessie's ear began to hurt from being pressed so hard against the door. She turned around, switching to her left ear just in time to hear the main door open and close again. "Mr. Clifton!" three voices said, almost together. The new person, was it Miles Clifton? Had a squeaky, panicky voice Jessie had trouble hearing. She heard him say, "Too soon," and "You promised at least one generation before." Then the voice soared. "This was a bad idea from the beginning. I knew it wasn't foolproof. If that girl could escape, we're all going to be caught." Now, Mr. Neely's voice was low and soothing. Jessie strained to hear her. Sensors picked her up the minute she lifted the manhole. Decided to have her followed to see who she would contact. Jessie reeled back from the door. Had Clifton's men known all along that she'd left Clifton? Could someone have followed her the whole way? She remembered the man knocking her down at the stopping point and how he looked so deliberately at the note with Mr. Neely's number. But how could Mr. Neely be one of Clifton's men? She rubbed her forehead in confusion. When she placed her ear to the door again, Mr. Neely was saying, "Can't escape now. I gave her enough to knock her out for hours." Jessie could tell the next voice was Mr. Clifton's, but she couldn't make out his words. Then Mr. Neely again, sounding huffy. All right, I'll double check. I'll lock her in if it makes you feel better." Jessie scrambled away from the door. Mr. Neely was coming. She had to get back to bed. It seemed miles to her room. Miles across the room. She was almost there. She could hear his steps outside. At the edge of the bed, Jessie tripped over her own boots. She went sprawling, her head striking her bedside. She hit the floor as the door opened. Distantly, Jessie heard Mr. Neely chuckle. Well, looks like our little time traveler fell out of bed." Then everything went black. Chapter 19. Jessie woke to pale sunlight on her face. Her head hurt, and she'd been having a horrifying dream about Ray and Toll and Mr. Neely all chasing her in a rusty brown car. She kept trying to run away, but the car always pulled up beside her with Mr. Neely leaning out the window, laughing and screaming, "It's no use! We can go 55 miles an hour!" Jessie opened her eyes, glad to leave such a nightmare behind. She sat up stiffly. Disoriented, she looked around the sunny, unfamiliar room. Oh, yes. She was at Mr. Neely's. He had called to get help for Katie and the other sick children, and everything was going to be okay. She even laid her back on the bed after she fell. Then she remembered. Mr. Neely wanted to kill her. Jessie shook her head. Even though the motion made it hurt worse. Surely this was a nightmare, too, but everything came back so vividly. Overhearing Mr. Neely on the phone, listening to the meeting with Mr. Clifton, Jessie kept shaking her head. How could she tell what was true? Her gaze fixed on the wooden door out to the rest of the apartment. Mr. Neely had told Mr. Clifton he'd lock her in. If she dreamed the whole thing, the door would open. Jessie walked unsteadily to the door. Her legs ached from all the walking the day before, and she felt stiff where the bread racks had hit her in the bread truck. I need someone to take care of me, she murmured to herself, wishing for Ma's best liniment and soothing touch. Maybe Mr. Neely would give her something for her aches and pains. If only. If only. The door was locked. Jessie stood for a long time, with her hand on the knob, absorbing everything the locked door meant. Mr. Neely hadn't gotten help for Katie and the other sick children. He was one of Clifton's men, only concerned about some mysterious research. He'd tried to drug Jessie, then locked her in the room. He planned to kill her after she told him everything that he wanted to know. Jessie's knees gave out, and she slid to the floor. She remembered bragging to Ma, had it only been the night before, about how brave she was. Now Jessie knew she wasn't. It had been easy to pretend when all she was faced with was little old Crooked Creek or some silly half-trained horse. That bravado really had just been to impress the other Clifton children. Now she was in real danger, and all she wanted was for Ma to come hold her on her lap and stroke her hair as though Jessie was still Katie's age. And oh, Jessie had failed Katie's and the others. I'm sorry, Jessie muttered. I'm sorry. She huddled by the door. Maybe things would be different. Maybe she could figure out how to escape. Maybe she could get help from someone else. If only she didn't feel so muddle-headed and all over achy. But even her throat hurt. It took all of Jessie's strength to keep her from wailing like a little baby. Outside, 2 robins chirped on the windowsill. Their cheery song seemed to mock Jessie. Oh, shut up, she whimpered. The robins flew away. Then seconds later, they were back, chirping again. In spite of herself, Jessie raised her head and stared out the window at the robins. The window? Just because Mr. Neely had locked the door, that didn't mean he had locked the window. And it had been opened the night before when she poured out the water. She was 2 stories up, but maybe. Stiffly, Jessie pulled herself to her feet and walked over to the window. The robins disappeared again. Jessie looked down. There was a bush far below. Even if she jumped into the bush, she probably would break her legs, especially since her legs felt half broken anyway. But wait. About 5 or 6 feet below her window, a brick ledge ran all the way around the building. If she could climb down to the ledge, maybe she could jump from there, couldn't she? Jessie debated. The ledge was only 1 brick wide, and it was awfully far down. What if she fell trying to get to the ledge? She looked back at the locked door. What other choice did she have? Was she going to stay here and wait for Mr. Neely to come back and kill her? She had to try to climb out the window. If only she could get the window opened. Hands shaking, Jessie fumbled with the window latch. At first it seemed jammed, but it had been hard to open the night before, too. Jessie jerked on it with all of her strength. Please, please, she muttered. And then, with a click that seemed much too loud, the latch gave way and the window slid open. Jessie stopped for a moment, afraid that Mr. Neely, wherever he was, might have heard the latch click. She listened for his footsteps outside her room, but all she could hear were the stupid robins chirping out of sight and, more distantly, the sound of lots of cars. She should go fast, though, no matter how terrible she felt. Any minute now, Mr. Neely might decide to check on her again. Jessie went back to the bed and sat down to pull on her muddy boots. Her hands shook. She could barely tie the laces. How did she think she could climb down a wall? Don't think things like that, she sternly told herself. You have to do it. Jessie strapped her pack around her waist and stepped gingerly back to the window. It took her 3 tries to pull herself up onto the windowsill, but she crouched half and half out, looking down. "You have to," she whispered to herself, "for Katie, for the others, so Mr. Neely doesn't kill you." Awkwardly, she turned and eased her right leg down, feeling for the ledge with her toe. But she knew, without looking, that the ledge was much lower. She'd have to climb down and stretch both legs toward the edge. She'd only be able to hold on with her fingers. Jessie shifted positions, hesitating. Her left leg began to tremble under her weight. The longer she waited, the harder it would be. Still, she paused, almost in tears. "I can't. Please help me," she breathed. Praying was better than crying. She hoped God really did exist outside Clifton. But what did she think he was going to do? Pick her up and place her safely on the ground? Then Jessie thought of pretending this was just another dare at home. "Oh, Andrew, of course, I'm not scared," she whispered unconvincingly, but it was enough to get her to swing her left leg down. "See," she said. She eased her body lower, lower, lower. Then her right foot struck the ledge. In a second, she was standing on it. Jessie smiled. Even if she fell now, she probably wouldn't get hurt. Not too badly. The metal frame of the window cut into her hands, so she moved her right hand down, clutching the edge of a brick 1 row below. She moved her left hand down too, and didn't fall. "This is easy," she murmured to pretend audience. "I could climb down the whole wall this way." She moved her right hand down 2 rows, and the pack shifted against her waist. She lost her balance and started to fall. She grabbed wildly at empty air, then struck something with her left hand, the ledge. She held tight and gripped the bricks with her right hand too. Now she was hanging from the ledge. Jessie grimaced over her shoulder at her pretend audience. Okay, it's not easy, but it worked. Jessie kicked out from the wall with her bare feet and let go of the ledge. She landed in the bush, which was prickly, and scratched her face and hands. "Ouch," she said softly. "But thank you, God." Jessie looked back up at the window she had climbed out of it. She half expected to see Mr. Neely's face peering down, but there was only the curtain blowing out. She had escaped. She was safe. Jessie sat up and hugged her knees. Tears came to her eyes again, but they were happy ones. She grinned, realizing she really hadn't thought she could have escaped, but she had. It's the end of day 1. We'll start on chapter 20 next time I read. And the next page is 141. Okay, talk to you later, guys. Bye.